in 1955, American audiences entered movie theaters to watch a young soldier climb onto a burning tank destroyer and face a German attack alone. The scene seemed designed for Hollywood. 6 German tanks, approximately 250 infantrymen, one wounded American lieutenant firing an exposed machine gun from a vehicle filled with fuel and ammunition. But the man on the screen was not an actor pretending to be a war hero. His name was Audie Murphy, and 10 years earlier, he had actually stood on that burning vehicle. The battle had happened in the frozen fields of France when Murphy was only 19 years old. His company was retreating. The Germans were closing in from 3 directions, and the vehicle beneath him could explode at any moment. Murphy would remain there until his ammunition was gone. But what he did after the machine gun fell silent may have been even more important than what he did while it was firing, because this is not simply the story of how one American soldier faced an attack supported by 6 tanks. It is the story of why a young man rejected for being too small to fight, refused to leave his friends, and why Hollywood eventually asked him to relive it all in front of a camera. To understand that decision, we have to return to January 26, 1945, to a small village in eastern France called Holtzwihr, and to the moment an entire German counterattack emerged from the snow. Nothing about Audie Murphy suggested that he would become an American legend. He grew up in extreme poverty on a sharecropper farm in Texas. His father eventually abandoned the family, and after his mother died, Murphy helped care for his younger brothers and sisters. He had left school after the 5th grade. He picked cotton for approximately $1 a day, and he hunted because the animals he brought home helped feed his family. That was where Murphy first learned to shoot. After the attack on Pearl Harbor, he attempted to join the military. But Murphy was barely 5 feet 5 inches tall and weighed close to 110 pounds. The Navy rejected him. The Marines rejected him. To military recruiters, he appeared too small, too thin, and too young for combat. Eventually, after his sister helped alter the age shown on his documents, Murphy was accepted by the United States Army. The country had nearly rejected the man who would become one of its most decorated combat soldiers. By January 1945, however, Murphy was no longer an inexperienced farm boy. He had fought through Sicily, Italy, and southern France. He had lost friends, been wounded, earned decorations, and received a battlefield commission. Now, he was a 19-year-old lieutenant responsible for the lives of an exhausted American company. And outside Holtzwihr, those lives were about to depend on a decision no military training could have prepared him to make. Murphy's Company B was fighting to eliminate the Colmar Pocket, one of Germany's last major positions west of the Rhine. The winter had transformed the battlefield. Snow covered the open fields. Freezing temperatures exhausted the soldiers, and the woods behind the American position had become strategically important. If the Germans captured them, they could penetrate the weakened American line. Company B had already suffered heavily during weeks of fighting. Then, on the afternoon of January 26th, German artillery began falling around the American position. Through the smoke and winter haze, Murphy saw shapes moving across the fields. 6 German tanks were advancing toward his company. Behind them came approximately 250 infantrymen, some wearing white camouflage that made them difficult to see against the snow. Company B did not have the strength to survive a direct confrontation. If the infantry reached the woods while protected by the tanks, the Germans could surround and destroy the Americans. Murphy gave his men an order: fall back into the trees and establish another defensive line. The soldiers began withdrawing, but their lieutenant remained at the forward command post with a field telephone. He would direct American artillery onto the Germans and buy his men enough time to escape. At least, that was the plan. Then the German tanks continued advancing, and behind Murphy, an American tank destroyer took a direct hit. The shell struck an MN-10 destroyer positioned near Murphy's command post. Its crew escaped as fire spread across the vehicle. Inside were fuel and ammunition. Every man around it understood the danger. The MN could explode without warning. But Murphy noticed something on top of the burning vehicle. Its exposed .5 tiered caliber machine gun was still operational. From that position, he could see the entire battlefield. He could also see the German infantry advancing behind the tanks. Those infantrymen were essential to the attack. They protected the tanks from American soldiers carrying anti-tank weapons and helped clear defensive positions the vehicles could not reach. If Murphy could separate the infantry from the armor, the tanks would become dangerously exposed. But reaching the machine gun meant crossing open ground, climbing onto a burning vehicle and standing where every German soldier could see him. Murphy looked toward the woods where his men were still retreating. Then he left the command post and ran toward the fire. As the Germans moved forward, the smallest officer on the battlefield climbed onto the largest target in sight. He took control of the machine gun, turned it toward the advancing infantry, and pulled the trigger. The heavy machine gun opened fire across the snow. German soldiers who had been advancing behind the tanks suddenly scattered or dropped into the fields. The attack did not stop, but its formation began to break apart. Murphy was not attempting to destroy 6 tanks with one machine gun. His real target was the infantry surrounding them. Without those soldiers, the tanks could not advance safely into the American position. A German squad began crawling through a drainage ditch toward Murphy's right flank. The ditch gave them protection and allowed them to approach without crossing the open field. Murphy waited until they came closer. Then he turned the machine gun toward them. The German advance stalled again, but every burst revealed Murphy's position more clearly. The Germans could see the burning tank destroyer. They could see the machine gun firing from its turret, and they could see the single American soldier operating it. Rifle rounds began striking the vehicle. Machine guns opened fire. Artillery shells exploded around Murphy. The tanks turned their weapons toward his position. Murphy was now receiving fire from 3 different directions, and the flames beneath him continued spreading. Murphy continued firing. Between bursts from the machine gun, he used the field telephone to help direct American artillery onto the German formation. The enemy was now so close that those shells were falling dangerously near his own position. Some German soldiers came within 10 yards of the burning vehicle. Murphy shifted the machine gun from one group to another, refusing to allow the infantry to reunite with the tanks. Then a shell fragment struck him in the leg. Murphy was bleeding. Smoke surrounded him. German fire was striking the ground and metal around him, and beneath his feet, flames were moving closer to the M10's fuel and ammunition. But Company B had not finished reorganizing in the woods. Every additional minute Murphy remained there gave his soldiers another minute to prepare, so he stayed. The battle became a contest between the Germans trying to silence one machine gun and one wounded lieutenant trying to keep that gun firing. The infantry attempted to advance. Murphy forced them back. They moved toward his flanks. He turned the weapon against them. The tanks continued forward, but without infantry protection, their advance became slower and more dangerous. For nearly an hour, the Germans fired at the burning vehicle. And for nearly an hour, the machine gun continued answering, until Murphy pulled the trigger once more. Nothing happened. The ammunition was gone. The Germans were still in front of him. The M10 was still burning beneath him, and Murphy no longer had a weapon capable of holding them back. This was the moment when his original mission should have ended. He had given his company time to escape. He was wounded, and there was nothing more one man could reasonably be expected to do. But Murphy was about to make his second impossible decision of the afternoon. Murphy climbed down from the tank destroyer and began moving toward the woods. Shortly after he left it, the burning vehicle exploded. He had survived the German artillery, the advancing infantry, the tanks, and the fire beneath his feet. But instead of continuing toward medical assistance, Murphy returned to Company B. His men had established a new defensive line among the trees. They expected their wounded commander to be evacuated. Murphy refused. He reorganized the surviving soldiers. Then he ordered them to advance. The same company that had been retreating only an hour earlier launched a counterattack. The German infantry had been scattered. The tanks had lost their protection, and the assault that had appeared unstoppable was now disorganized and losing momentum. Faced with the renewed American attack, the Germans began withdrawing. The woods remained in American hands. According to Murphy's Medal of Honor citation, his machine gun fire and direction of artillery killed or wounded approximately 50 German soldiers. But the true result was not the number of enemy casualties. Murphy's stand had prevented Company B from being surrounded and possibly destroyed. The German force had entered the battle with tanks, hundreds of infantrymen, and overwhelming firepower. It had been stopped because one wounded American officer remained in a position every other soldier had been forced to abandon. When Murphy was later asked why he had continued fighting, he reportedly gave a simple explanation. "They were killing my friends." For his actions near Holtzwihr, Audie Murphy received the Medal of Honor. By the end of the war, he had earned dozens of American and foreign decorations. He had received every major United States Army Combat Award for valor available at the time, and when the war in Europe ended, he was still only 20 years old. Murphy returned to the United States as a national hero. After his photograph appeared on the cover of Life magazine, actor James Cagney invited him to Hollywood. Murphy did not resemble the heroes audiences were accustomed to seeing. He was small, quiet, and uncomfortable with fame, but he gradually built a successful acting career, primarily appearing in westerns. In 1949, his wartime memoir, To Hell and Back, was published. The book became a bestseller, and Universal Pictures decided to adapt it into a movie. Murphy initially resisted playing himself. He did not see the young soldier in the story as a larger-than-life hero. He remembered the fear, exhaustion, and friends who had never returned. Eventually, however, he agreed. In 1955, audiences watched To Hell and Back with Audie Murphy portraying Audie Murphy. The man recreating the battlefield was not imagining what combat felt like. He was remembering it. The soldier shown climbing onto the burning tank destroyer was the same man who had climbed onto the real one. The actor surrounded by explosions had already survived the actual artillery, and the face audiences watched as American soldiers died belonged to a man who had spent the previous decade living with those deaths. The movie became one of Universal's greatest commercial successes of its era. But when the camera stopped, Murphy could not simply leave the war on the studio set. Murphy suffered from insomnia, depression, and recurring nightmares. He sometimes slept with a loaded pistol beneath his pillow. For a time, he became dependent on sleeping medication before forcing himself to break that dependence. Today, his symptoms would likely be recognized as post-traumatic stress disorder. At the time, many returning soldiers were expected to remain silent. Murphy refused to pretend that courage made someone immune to psychological injury. He spoke publicly about the emotional damage caused by combat and urged the government to provide better support for returning veterans. The man celebrated for fighting a visible enemy used his fame to defend soldiers facing battles no one else could see. On May 28, 1971, Audie Murphy died in a plane crash in Virginia. He was only 45 years old. He was buried with full military honors at Arlington National Cemetery. Murphy's story began with a boy the military considered too small to fight. It led to a frozen battlefield where 6 tanks and hundreds of soldiers advanced toward his company. It continued on top of a burning vehicle after everyone else had been forced to retreat. And it ended on movie screens, where the real soldier returned to the battlefield and showed millions of Americans what he had survived. But the most important moment came after the machine gun stopped firing. Murphy had already saved his men enough time to escape. He had every reason to leave. Instead, he returned to them and led them forward, because Audie Murphy did not remain on that burning vehicle to become a legend. He remained there because his friends were still in danger, and while they needed him, he refused to leave. Audie Murphy stopped a German attack almost alone. But why would American Sherman crews let a deadly Panther tank drive right past them? Click the video on screen to discover the answer.